Jeb Corliss is one of the most extreme wingsuit pilots in the world. In 2012, he attempted a jump near Pontresina, Switzerland. His parachute lines tangled, he lost control, and he crashed into a mountain slope, fracturing his skull and spine. Yet remarkably, months later, he attempted another powered flight. His story is often cited in media coverage of adrenaline addiction. What compels someone to flirt with death again and again for that brief surge of euphoria? Today, we'll explore how the brain becomes hooked on adrenaline, why some people chase danger like an addiction, and, most importantly, what you can do if you find yourself drawn into that spiral. In January 2012, during a wingsuit jump off Table Mountain in Cape Town, South Africa, Jeb Corliss miscalculated his trajectory and slammed into a rocky outcrop at nearly 120 miles per hour. The crash shattered both ankles, broke his fibula, tore knee ligaments, and left deep gashes that required skin grafts. He was airlifted to a hospital, spent 5 weeks recovering, and then months relearning how to walk. Most would have retired, but within a year, Corliss was back, planning the Flying Dagger, an attempt to thread between two rock spires at over 100 miles per hour. Why return after such trauma? Corliss has said simply, "This is who I am. I can't not do it." His case shows how adrenaline can hook the brain so deeply that even near-death crashes don't end the cycle. It is precisely this compulsion, this need to return again and again, that scientists now compare to behavioral addiction. Adrenaline and noradrenaline, the arousal system. When you perceive a threat or an extreme situation, jumping out of a plane, soaring off a cliff, the locus coeruleus, a small nucleus in the brainstem, floods the brain with noradrenaline, norepinephrine. Simultaneously, the adrenal medulla, in your adrenal glands, releases adrenaline, epinephrine, into the bloodstream. These catecholamines ramp up heart rate, dilate airways, sharpen senses, raise blood pressure, and prime your muscles. This is classic fight or flight physiology. But the arousal doesn't act alone. Dopamine and the reward circuits. The rush that people crave comes from dopamine, released in the ventral tegmental area, VTA, and projected to the nucleus accumbens and prefrontal areas. In reward learning models, dopamine acts as a teaching and incentive signal, phasic bursts, that strengthens associations with behaviors that delivered it. In adrenaline-charged events, the sudden surge of noradrenergic arousal boosts dopamine activity via modulatory inputs, making the experience more rewarding. That coupling is what turns danger into thrill in the brain and wires you to want more. Interplay and dependency. Over time, the brain begins to expect that arousal-dopamine pairing. The adrenaline becomes a trigger for dopamine release. The brain learns that danger plus arousal equals reward. That's the neurochemical hook. A review on adrenergic receptors and stimulant-induced behaviors further supports that repeated adrenergic activation sensitizes reward circuits, especially in predisposed individuals. Thus, a sudden stressor triggers adrenaline or noradrenaline, which interacts with dopamine circuits to create a rush. Repeated exposure trains the brain to crave that rush. Let's map how these signals travel. Brain circuits. During a high arousal event, the amygdala alerts, hypothalamus triggers the fight-or-flight, locus coeruleus floods noradrenaline, and dopamine systems fire reward signals simultaneously. But under high arousal, prefrontal cortex, PFC function is impaired. Your ability to weigh long-term risk, foresee consequences, and inhibit impulsive urges weakens. In other words, rational control gets knocked offline when adrenaline is high. Personality and sensation-seeking trait. Why do some people become adrenaline junkies while others flee from danger? Personality is key. Psychologist Marvin Zuckerman proposed sensation-seeking as a stable trait, the drive for novel, intense stimulation, even at risk. High sensation seekers need more arousal to reach baseline, making them more likely to engage in extreme activities. Studies show strong correlations between sensation-seeking scores and extreme sports participation. High sensation seekers also release more dopamine to novelty, amplifying the reward of risk-taking. Some research notes they may appraise risk as less threatening, showing more dopamine and less cortisol than low-sensation people in chaotic stimuli. In effect, what looks terrifying to most people may look exhilarating or barely stressful to a sensation seeker. That lowers the psychological barrier to exposure. To them, what seems terrifying may feel exhilarating or barely stressful. Genetic polymorphisms in dopamine-related genes, DRD, DAT, COMT, further shape impulsivity and risk tolerance in athletes and high performers. Personality and neurochemistry together make some brains more prone to adrenaline addiction. Behavioral addiction features. This is where the analogy to substance addiction becomes more than metaphor. Over time, adrenaline hits feel less satisfying. The brain downregulates sensitivity to the arousal dopamine coupling. To get the same high, the person escalates risk, jumping from skydiving to wingsuit, or from climbing hills to cliff sides. The danger has to increase just to feel the same high. When abstaining, for example, forced rest after injury, individuals often report boredom, irritability, restlessness, anxiety, classic withdrawal symptoms. In a 2016 study, rock climbers reported negative affect and craving when unable to climb. For some, the pursuit of adrenaline begins to disrupt jobs, relationships, finances, and physical safety. The behavior shifts from optional thrill to functional compulsion, chasing risk even at cost to one's life or obligations. The psychiatric case studies describe addicted climbers who ignored family, risked severe injury, or lied about their behavior. These features, tolerance, withdrawal, impairment, match widely used criteria for behavioral addictions, for example, gambling, and mirror substance addiction dynamics. How does the brain lock in this pattern? Emotional memory and consolidation. Stress and arousal hormones like noradrenaline and cortisol enhance memory consolidation for emotionally significant events. That's why traumatic or thrilling episodes are more deeply encoded. The pairing of danger plus arousal plus reward reinforces the memories and strengthens connections. Multiple neuroscience reviews confirm this modulation of memory by stress hormones. Thus, each high adrenaline event becomes a strong memory trace, making the brain better at anticipating and craving that feeling. Habit circuitry and plastic change. Repeated activation of neural circuits leads to synaptic strengthening, myelination, and rewiring. Pathways linking threat signals to reward anticipation get sharpened. Connections from PFC to inhibitory circuits may weaken through disuse. Over time, the behavior transitions from goal-directed to habitual or compulsive with less conscious control. This is a principle well established in studies of addiction and habit formation. In effect, you begin to need less conscious intention. The brain begins to anticipate or seek the hit automatically. In sum, arousal enhances memory, repeated exposure rewires circuits, and the pattern becomes baked in. If someone recognizes themselves in this pattern, or works with someone who is, the question becomes, how do you reclaim control? Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and acceptance-based strategies. CBT can help by identifying and challenging the beliefs and triggers that drive risk-seeking. A person might explore beliefs like, "I'm only alive when I'm flying," or "I need the high to feel anything," and replace them with healthier coping narratives. Some newer approaches use acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. Rather than fighting the urge, acknowledge it, but commit to values-driven action that doesn't rely on danger. Clinical reviews on stress and behavioral addiction suggest these tools strengthen regulation and self-awareness. For example, reviews of stress-related interventions in addiction literature, though fewer studies exist for adrenaline addiction specifically. Channeling sensation-seeking into safer outlets. Because sensation-seeking is a trait, suppressing it entirely may backfire. Instead, channel it into controlled risk. Adventure sports with good safety margins. Rock climbing with gear, whitewater kayaking, trail running, high-intensity training, or novelty challenges, travel, creative endeavors that stimulate arousal without fatal stakes. Mindfulness and stress regulation. Mindfulness practices enhance awareness of craving and reduce impulsive reactivity. Some experimental studies show that mindfulness can moderate stress responses and help high-sensation people regulate anxiety. Gradual tapering, relapse planning, peer support, set limits, reduce frequency or intensity gradually, not abruptly. Use relapse prevention strategies from behavioral addiction models. Identify triggers, plan alternative behaviors. Seek peer groups, therapists, or coaches familiar with thrill-seeking behaviors. Address underlying anxiety, depression, or trauma. Often, risk-seeking is symptomatic of deeper issues: emotional void, depression, trauma. Effective treatment must address those root causes. Clinical reviews confirm that stress disorders, mood disorders, and externalizing traits often co-occur with high-risk behavior. If you or someone you know is struggling with compulsive risk-taking that's harming life, professional help, clinical psychology, psychiatry, should be considered. At the end of the day, adrenaline is not just a chemical rush, it's a double-edged sword. It can push us to achieve the impossible, but it can also chain us to a cycle that risks everything. Jeb Corliss's story shows us both the beauty and the cost of chasing the edge. The question is, will you master the rush, or will the rush master you? Stay curious, stay aware, and remember, the most dangerous addiction is the one we don't see until it's too late.